Good morning, practitioners. My name is Shannon Douglas, and this is Tarot Tuesday. Today, we're going to tackle the Tower. There's an old expression I learned years ago, and I thought I'd open with it, and because it's kind of funny. And I often use this if the Tower comes up in a tarot spread that I'm doing for a friend or someone close to me. In the limited readings that I do, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. My name is Shannon Douglas. I'm the author of the upcoming book, Chasing Quicksilver, a book about the nature of the soul and the psyche. And today, in my exploration of the tarot archetypes, the Tower is on the table. And I've been thinking about this for a few days, a week. I'm spending about a week meditating and contemplating, and in some cases researching the backgrounds deeper of the cards, as I've been doing for the last 4 months. And the Tower, maybe the classic story of the Tower is the biblical story of the Tower of Babylon. If you're not familiar with the story, there was a great Babylonian king by the name of Nebuchadnezzar, and he built a ziggurat. And a ziggurat is something like a pyramid. In the image I have in my mind, it's a circular tower that spirals upwards. So we didn't have the technology to build the kind of buildings that we have today, where you have an elevator, you get in, you go up to the top. The spiraling ramp was what I seem to recall from the biblical stories. And his goal was to build the tallest tower that had ever been built in order to touch the sky or reach out to God. And so, of course, many years and many slaves, and this Tower of Babylon is built. And Nebuchadnezzar's got a bit of an ego. And he decides that when the tower is built, he ascends this tower and he goes up to the top, and he takes out a crossbow or a bow, and he launches the bolt at the sky. Firing the bolt at God is the story, as I recall it. And of course, if you follow the Old Testament, God doesn't take kindly to this kind of thing. And the kind of ego that it takes to defy God doesn't stand under God's eyes. And so God destroyed the Tower of Babylon, and he dispersed all of the people who had gathered around or who have been brought around this city from all over the world. And as he did that, he made it so that nobody could understand what anybody else was saying. And this is the biblical explanation for where all of the different languages in the world come from. And we get the expression babble when a child is babbling, or when an individual is babbling or speaking incoherently, from this story of Babylon. And the defiant king Nebuchadnezzar, who had the audacity to fly his bolt in the face of God. Now, we're at interesting times. There's an old Chinese curse that says, "May you live in interesting times." The interesting times that we're in right now is we seem to have built a civilization and a culture of the moment where nobody understands anybody else. It seems like we're all speaking different languages. The polarization and the kinds of media environment and communication environment that we have, we're all speaking the same words. We're all using the same language, but our philosophies and our political beliefs, our religious beliefs, and our epistemological models are so different that we can't even put ourselves into somebody else's shoes to understand them. Our automatic response is to reject, especially people who disagree with us. And we become accustomed to a highly conflicted environment where if someone doesn't agree with us, we go immediately to a couple of labels. They're stupid, they're extremists, they're Democrats or Republicans, or Trumpists, and whatever else. and we're not understanding each other. It's a big problem. And we can maybe reflect on the biblical story of Babylon and wonder, was it the problem of language that arose first? Was there extreme polarization? Was there a kernel of literal truth in the story of Babylon, where tribalism had so possessed all of the different people who had assembled around the construction of this tower, the hanging gardens of Babylon, legendary architecture and technology in the ancient world? Did people become so polarized that society itself collapsed, which is what the story confers upon us? Now, it's a pretty serious topic. And, maybe not as glib and trite as the expression, you want to make God laugh? Tell him your plans. Another one of my favorite stories about the tower, maybe not so frightening. I'm at a certain age and stage where we used to memorize Monty Python scripts. I had friends who'd memorized the script for entire movies of Monty Python. Life of Brian, Holy Grail. If you know the Holy Grail, there is a scene there it's called the Swamp Castle. And I'm going to put a link in here. It's short, and probably not as funny as if you understood it in context. But the skit is that a king built a castle in a swamp. And then the castle sank into the swamp. And then I built another castle, and it sank into the swamp. And then the third castle burned down, fell over, and sank into the swamp. But the fourth castle stood up. It's very difficult to impose one's ego onto a situation, insisting on a particular outcome of a situation. It's very challenging. And, as I've studied and as I've shared with you some of the archetypes of tarot as we've gone through this, I've often drawn our attention back to other cards that preceded. And in this particular case, we can think of the card we talked about last week, the Devil card. So I'll put a link up here. Because as it occurs to me, and I've been studying tarot for almost 25 years, as a study of archetypes, as I've said before, and a study of character. And it occurred to me that the Devil card is a reflection or an analysis or an accounting of a certain way of being in the world. It's egoic attachments. And you can go through your whole life with just one egoic attachment over another, at kind of a low level, disconnected from the will of God, disconnected from higher self and from purpose, and driven entirely by ego, suppressing the unconscious mind and bumbling around in life like a fool. And so it represents a way of being. Whereas the tower represents more of an event. It's the outcome of a certain way of being, an unfortunate way of being, and an unfortunate course of actions. Now, what's an example of the tower in our lives? Well, perhaps there's one where I recount an academic experience, and maybe you've had this experience or something like it. After high school, I went to a local community college, took liberal arts, went on to university after that, studied creative writing, and followed my academic pursuits. And I pretty much paid my own way. I had a little bit of help, but mostly it was me. So I had skin in the game. And there were tons and tons of people in the first year of post-secondary school in a program who were there funded by their parents because their parents told them they had to go to school. They had no investment at all in the outcome. And they weren't there for the right reasons. And what do you think the corresponding results were? Low grades, dropout, failure, contempt, feeling like it's a waste of time, unmotivated, not focused. And so we can get ourselves involved in, what's another example of this? You ever watch what is it, American Idol? I haven't watched it in years, but in the early days, of course, they hold these big cattle calls for potential singers, and there's a panel, and you get thousands of people coming out to test out their singing voice. And you occasionally get people, and they would continue to, sort of follow these people through the process, who get there and they're tone deaf. They have zero rhythm whatsoever. There's no sort of echo chamber of the shower around them to reflect back their voice. And they can shatter glass. They're so bad. And the judges all go through their, I'm sorry, it's a no, I'm sorry, it's a no. And then the person pushes back and says, you guys don't know what you're talking about. You're wrong. Eventually, the reality has to come to call to a person possessed by that kind of ego, where the internal representation that we have of ourselves, which is so out of alignment potentially with the world that we live in, that there has to be a reckoning for that. And that can be the dissolution of the ego, the collapse of the ego, the destruction or the disintegration of the persona. Disintegration, by the way, it means break apart. It's the opposite of integrity. And so when a person has a lack of integrity, which we know about from the issues that we explored in temperance, where they're unable to temper the extremes of their personality and experience, driven by their ego in the Devil card, eventually the tower falls down. It means we shouldn't try to force something. Now, a few weeks ago, the last time I did a tarot reading, I was entertaining at a cottage, and I turn cards for half a dozen people, and it's jokes and laughter, and it's very informal, and try and give people some reflection back to them from the cards of archetypes in their lives, and everyone can relate to these things. And I turned 3 cards. Now, keep in mind, I've been shuffling my deck for a couple of hours. And if you've been following along, you may know how I feel about the Lover's card, the relationship of the Devil card to the Lover's card, the parallel structures and the difference between them. And that structure of the soul or the psyche, the conscious mind in the male figure of the Lovers, the unconscious mind, the female figure, his loving gaze towards her gaze up towards the higher self. This is the structure of our psyche. If we can make peace with our unconscious mind, integrate ourselves, we open up channel to the divine. Coincidence, synchronicities, the right things happening, moving towards us as they should naturally, without struggle, without fight, just pure sense of connection to self and integrity, and then the world unfolds as it should. Tower, obviously, is the consequence of not being correctly aligned within the self, that there is an event of collapse and utter destruction. So I cut 3 cards for myself. The first card was the Lovers. The second card was the Devil. And the third card was the Tower. This raised all kinds of questions for me about the path that I'm on. And if you've been following my channel for a while, you know that I've been doing a series called Soul Mapping. Haven't done any videos in a couple of weeks, but putting an awful lot of thought into this and what direction I want to take with it. If you've got feedback, you've been watching those videos, let me know what kind of direction you might see for it. it gave me pause because I have two major paths in my life at the moment. I have the path as a professional, financial professional, advisor. I have a bunch of certifications. I work with high net worth individuals, managing wealth, and counsel people through major stages of their lives and life events. There's a dollar sign pretty much in front of every life event that people have, and I've been through just about every possible life event that you can imagine with people that I work for. Untimely death, early untimely death, orphan children, cancers, transition of businesses, lawsuits, like pretty much everything you can imagine in life. And I'm good at it. I've been doing it for 20 years. And in spite of that, I've had this urge to write particularly about the nature of soul and spirit and psyche and who we are, what our relationship is with God. And so me cutting these 3 cards was an affirmation, but it also raised big questions for me about my own ego and what it is I'm trying to create and force, if that's the case. And that has been sitting with me now for 4 or 5 weeks. And it makes me wonder about what the tower is in my life that I'm building. Is it the tower that I'm building around writing and communicating and teaching and sharing the things that I'm so passionate about? These are the things I'm most passionate about in my whole life, besides my relationship with my spouse and my children. Because I think it's so important at an individual level, at a societal level, that self-understanding be reinforced and supported, and through self-understanding and understanding our own language that we speak with ourselves, the own structure of our psyche and how we relate to others, that can change the world. I don't believe that we can possibly change the world by going and driving our energy outside of ourselves if we lack self-knowledge. If we lack self-knowledge, we may be possessed by the devil. We may lack the right temperance. We may lack the kind of internal balance that we see in the Justice card, the notion of Mayet. So, when we're exploring archetypes, they're always going to have some kind of resonance with us. And this one particularly has a resonance with me. Now I'm curious because the Tower is one of those big scary cards in the deck, and the implications of cataclysm they can be the destruction of the individual ego, but they can also be the collapse of an entire system. The entire city of Babylon collapsed, and it was attributed to the defiance of God, or the defiance of God's will. We're a couple of weeks away from the election. At one point back in August, I was wondering if the Tower card was going to show up on Halloween or just before the election. And that's not the case. We're going to be into the next week is going to be the Star, of course. The week after that, the Moon and the Sun. The next scary card really is Judgment at card number 20, as I'm getting close to the end of this cycle. How does the Tarot Tower play out in your life? What kind of experiences have you had, whether personal, whether in a business or professional setting, or an academic setting, family setting, relationship setting? I'm curious. Let me know in the comments. And remember, if you've been following along, you haven't seen some of my soul mapping videos, have a look. Let me know the kinds of things that resonate with you and maybe that you'd like to see more of. And I'm going to spend some time reflecting on what the things that are currently standing in my life are, and what the right one is. My name is Shannon Douglas, the author of Chasing Quicksilver, forthcoming book about the nature of the soul. This is Tarot Tuesdays. Today, the Tower.